All right, everyone. Welcome back to our series on managed operations in Power Platform. Last time we were covering a little bit more of the fundamentals of getting the out-of-the-box pipelines up and running, getting that to be able to deploy from a dev environment to a target, say, production environment. What I want to go through this week is really more focusing now on implementing that approval process for those deployments. A key thing when you're more from the pro code way of things is that as you're going through, say, Git, GitHub, anything like that, DevOps, you're going to go through a PR process or a pull request process, and that's what serves as an approval gate, right, for making sure that something's being reviewed before it's deployed, say, to test or especially more specifically production. And so in this case, what we need to do is right out of the box, our pipelines are just going to deploy as soon as someone triggers them. If they have access, they deploy. That's just going to trigger it. Now what we need to do is insert an approval flow into that process so that we can really control what we want to do, who is that going to, right? There's many ways to expand upon that. So jumping in, this was our original solution from last time, our Kumo test deployment solution. It was in my own Storm Anderson's environment. Now what we need to do is move away from, And now what we need to do is move away from the platform host that a lot of people typically start off with and move over to using a custom pipeline host. So I'm going to switch over to the admin Power Platform Center, going to go to deployments, go to settings here, and the use a custom pipelines host. This should show up depending on one, if you have access to the platform host here, but the setting is only on this one. So if you're on another one, you won't see it. So just make sure to come here, hit custom host, make sure that's set to the one you want, and save. Now that'll handle the next time someone sets up a pipeline, everything is going to be started. Now that's going to handle next time someone sets up a pipeline, that'll handle provisioning that pipeline, getting that organized in the COE environment, our custom host here. So let's go over to that environment, and I'm going to call out a few things where now that we're here, we need to create the approval flow itself to insert it into the deployment pipeline. What we want to do for that is create our own solution. So you can see we have a Kumo managed operations demo solution. This is all empty at this point. But the reason I want to call this out is because this solution is what's customizing our deployment. I want to call out this solution because this is customizing our deployment process, right? The other solution is the solution in and of itself for, say, a business use case or anything else. So just to make sure you understand, right, this one is just for maintaining any of these customizations we implement. It's always just good practice to have a solution being able to host your different customizations. So let's start simple. We're going to start with an environment variable. And easy enough, this is just going to represent the approver that we want to receive that email, right? So I'm going to say test deployment approver. It is just going to be a text, no default value. Actually, let's just put this here. You could always do more robust things such as sending this to a group or anything like that. We're just going to keep this to an individual for now. All right, now that I have my environment variable, now let's jump right into creating our flow. Okay, and we're just going to say test deployment approval flow. The action we want, we will just go ahead and jump forward, so skip for now. All right, just going to repaste that there. And so the action we need is the Dataverse action when an action is performed. And I called it an action. This is actually a trigger, but it is a trigger looking for when an action is performed. And the settings we want to grab from this, they're all based on catalog. So the first catalog that we want to go into is the Microsoft Dataverse Common. The category for that is the Power Platform Pipelines. The table name here is none because we're not connecting to a specific table. And the action name itself, you can see that we have the different hooks here. So this is where Dataverse is having this process be managed kind of in a black box, but we have the connection points that allow us to insert ourselves into that flow, right? So the one we want is on deployment requested. All right. And so now let's create a next task, or rather a compose. And I just want to reference our email here. And so this should be test deployment approver. Perfect. And then I want to show you an existing run that happened and show you what the result of this when an action is performed endpoint. And so if I pull up here, you can see that the output parameters right here in this section really outline kind of the key things we want to be aware of. So you can see we have the artifact name itself. This is the Kumo core sync flow that someone deployed. This was to our PMO environment. And you can see the deploy as user, Elena herself. Now, one fun thing about this is all we know of the name of that user. We do not have their user ID, their email necessarily. So this creates the need to search for that user if we want to use that as a part of the approval flow. So I'm going to come back over here. And the next step I'm going to do now is search for users. And all I'm going to do is just pass that parameter directly in here. So the search term would be for, scrolling down here. There we go. We can see the deploy as user. This is going to search the name, right? So that's where we just need to do that for the name. We'll take the top one and search term required. That's fine. Now, if we want to access that person, we will get back an array. So the first thing we can do is just look to pull out the value. So we'll go first of that search for users. And if we go back to that existing run, we can see for search for users, the output of that is this record. And so I only used a compose here, but let's actually use a parse JSON. And let's just actually grab this. We're just going to put this right in here in the content. Oops. And we actually can get rid of this compose now. So this is going to be parse requester. And up here we have the approver, right? So this is the approver email. And so now you can kind of see we have all of the key pieces that we need to start this process. So let's go ahead and just do a simple approval. Start and wait. And the approval type is just going to be an approve reject, first to respond. Now where we put in that environment variable, we only put in one email, right? Using something like this, considering that we can send this to multiple people, this could be something where if we did add semicolons to that environment variable, we could now have a group of users receiving this, and the first would be sufficient. But I'm going to start filling this out a little bit. And realistically, this language here is entirely up to you what you want to build upon, right? You could inject a ton more information here from the solution, from DevOps, from anything else. Or you could just rely on the solution information we're getting just from the trigger itself. So this is just going to be Kumo deployment approval. Assigned to, of course, is then going to be our approver email. The details I've used, let me grab those. Okay, bring those over here. Oops. With Markdown, these should be like this. There we go. And these are just all of those properties that are coming through. So the pipeline name, you can see stage name, right? It's really just giving us all the details we're hoping for there. And for the item link itself, this would be the link to the stage run. And so we'll just put that there for that. Other than that, though, there's really not much more we need to extrapolate from what we need to get out of the trigger itself. It's really just now waiting for this approval. And so let's just go ahead and add our condition. All right, straightforward enough. And so now we'll start to look at the outcome of that approval. And so we'll just go here. Outcome, there we go. And that's equal to approve, not approved. That always catches people. And we'll just change the name of this. Check for approval. All right, and so now to make sure that this goes on its merry way, right, based on the status of this approval, that's where we're going to look for the perform an unbound action. All right, there it is. And so with this, there's two different actions depending on if we're doing the kind of standard flow with the user deployment, or there are different actions we need to look at if we are doing a delegated deployment. And so I'll cover those in a later video, but for now we're just going to focus on the one that we did, which is the pre-deployment step. And so we're just going to look for the one that we need, which is the update pre-deployment step. Oops. Update pre-deployment step status. There we go. All right, and so the stage run ID, this is just going to be the parameter we need right from the trigger. There it is. The comments, if we did want to put any comments more particular, in this case, I'm just going to put the outcome and the deployment step, pre-deployment step status. These are just kind of known values, so just write them down, put them to memory, but for approval, it's 20, and for rejection, it is 30. And so since we set up the action for what needs to happen here, I'm just going to copy this, bring this right over here, my clipboard. And like I said, we're just going to come down here and change this pre-deployment step status to 30. All right, let's go ahead and save. The one thing we do need to do is go over to the pipeline management itself. And so I'm going over to the COE environment where we have that deployment pipeline configuration app. This gets deployed when you install the pipelines, and come over here to our pipelines. You can see the app itself. So if I open up the app, this is where I see all of those pipelines. I'll go into test deployment. And what we need to go do is go to the stage. The stage is what actually holds the requirements or some of the nuance here, right? Whether it's a delegated deployment, is there a pre-deployment step required, pre-export step? And so in this case, we just want to make sure that this pre-deployment step is checked. So if it wasn't, or if you do now, please make sure to save. And we should now be set up, ready to go. So I'm going to come back to our original solution, the Kumo test deployment pipeline solution. And I'm just going to go ahead and start to trigger a deployment now. Move through the connections, move through the environment variables, and we'll see now it's incrementing to 1003. And that went ahead and started our process. So let's go over to our flow. Let's hit refresh. This should trigger in just a few seconds here, and there we go. So let's look at the action. Looks like it's just about to get down to the approval. And we can see our output parameters. So artifact name, this is our solution. Yep. The deployment stage name, it's going to the demo environment. The pipeline itself, the version, the user, all of this is as we were expecting. And so now we can see that it went down for the approval. All right, and we can see that request came through here. So same thing, it's the information. If there was a scheduled time, we have the link to the artifact. And if there was any additional information we wanted to include here, but in short, this is where we can see everything we needed to, and I'll go ahead and approve. Now if I come back, we'll see that approval continue its way. And it did go ahead and do the approve section. So if I go back, you'll see sometimes, now it might have already gone. Yep, it's currently deploying. There will be a little warning here that as it's deploying, it needs time or it's pending a action. that's where that warning won't go away until you have that approval. So if you turn a pre-deployment step on, that's going to be what stops it in its tracks, because it needs a flow to continue that process, or it needs something to continue that process. All right, and so the last thing I wanted to show was, like I said, this was for the demo environment, but technically how this runs is this is going to run on any deployment request that comes in this environment, which isn't necessarily ideal, right? And so really what we want to do is we want to try and use one of these parameters to put a condition on the trigger. And so now we could do target environment ID, we could do a few different things. I was going to use the deployment stage name just for simplicity. But again, if you did really want to go off of the GUID for the target environment, that would probably be more robust long term. But I'm going to grab demo environment. Let's edit the flow again. And so now what we're going to do is when an action is performed, we're going to come to the settings, and the trigger condition is what we want to look for here. And so, like I was saying, that trigger condition allows us to look at any of those properties. And so the one I want to look at is the deployment stage name. In this case, I'm going to put equals. And again, you can see I'm just using the query logic, right? So add equals, the trigger output. This is how we get to that parameter. And I want to look for the demo environment. And so that way now, if I do that, now this will only run for requests that are triggered for that environment, and in particular, that deployment stage name. So this is just one way. Again, if you want to do it by environment, you might be able to do a flow that supports multiple different pipelines all going to one, and maybe that's one way you want to do it. Or you could say, hey, per environment, we're going to have different approvers. You certainly have the flexibility. This is just a way to start approaching that. But all right, with that, we have finished implementing our approval flow. That sets you up for being able to just start having some type of review process, right? And introducing a stage gate in that deployment. What we're going to start to look at next time is really looking deeper into the delegated deployments. How can we start to set up a service principal to handle this rather than it being based on per user? And then later on, we'll start to touch on the Git integration pieces. But all right, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.